In early 1943, Japanese pilots dismissed the new F6F Hellcat. The Pacific had favored the Mitsubishi A6M0 since 1941, and the U.S. Navy's F4F Wildcat had survived by tactics rather than speed or climb. The Hellcat looked larger and heavier, and few expected it to alter a balance set by 2 years of combat along island chains and open sea. The first carrier launches in August 1943 began to test that judgment. Squadrons found the Hellcat could hold altitude, dive hard, and return with damage that would wreck lighter airframes. Its Pratt & Whitney R2800 kept power at fighting heights, and 6.50 caliber guns delivered short, decisive bursts. Engagement reports shifted from caution to consistent, repeatable success. By the war's final year, more than 5,000 Japanese aircraft had fallen to Hellcat guns, and carrier task forces operated under firm air cover across the Central Pacific. The reversal raised a clear question for this story to answer. How did a fighter judged blunt and ordinary become the dominant platform of the theater? Through design choices, training, radar control, and industrial scale, and why did those choices matter more than early impressions? In 1941 and 1942, the Mitsubishi A6M0 set the pace across the Pacific. It climbed fast, turned tight, and ranged far over open water. The U.S. Navy answered with the F4F Wildcat, a durable fighter that survived by discipline rather than raw performance. Early carrier battles proved that skill could blunt surprise, but the balance in climb and acceleration remained with Japan. Tactics filled part of the gap. Naval aviators refined the thatch weave to break a tail chase and create brief firing windows. The method saved lives, yet it did not change the physics of altitude and energy. At Coral Sea and Midway, Allied strategy held, but gun camera reels showed how often Wildcats escaped by teamwork instead of speed. Guadalcanal turned lessons into daily pressure. Long sorties drained fuel margins, and damaged Wildcats nursed engines back to Henderson Field or a moving deck. Combat reports repeated the same needs: more power at height, better forward vision on approach, and firepower that ended a pass quickly. The Bureau of Aeronautics gathered each point and asked industry for a successor. Grumman's answer began as the XF6F1 with a Wright R2600. Field intelligence in late 1942 pushed a decisive change: fit the Pratt & Whitney R2, 1800, and accept the weight. The redesign became the XF6F3, a fighter built to climb under load, hold speed in a dive, and endure salt air and heat. Agility would matter less than control and survival. Carrier work shaped the cockpit and the gear. A higher seat and revised canopy improved sight lines in the groove. Wide-track landing gear reduced deck mishaps. Armor and self-sealing tanks raised survival odds, trading elegance for endurance. 6.50 caliber guns remained the standard, backed by ample ammunition for long interceptions over empty sea. Production urgency matched the front. Bethpage reorganized lines for flow, tooling jigs to speed changeovers and cut idle time. The Navy placed large orders before full trials were complete, betting that power, protection, and pilot-centric design would pay back at sea. Training commands wrote conversion courses so squadrons could transition while underway. By early 1943, the first F6F3S reached test units and carriers for workups. Maintenance crews learned the engine's habits. Pilots learned that patience at low altitude bought strength at height. The airplane felt deliberate on the climb, but in a dive it held energy, tracked steadily, and recovered cleanly. Skeptics noted the weight. Crews noted the returns. The strategic map demanded proof. Island-hopping plans aimed for the Solomons and the Central Pacific, where carriers would need a fighter to escort strikes, guard task forces, and fight over enemy fields. With orders placed, syllabi written, and squadrons forming on deck, the stage was set. The judgment of the Hellcat would now be measured in returning pilots. The Hellcat entered fleet service in mid-1943 as a direct answer to lessons drawn at Guadalcanal. The Navy no longer sought parity with the Zero. It demanded superiority that could be trained, maintained, and repeated at sea. At Bethpage, teams translated that demand into production, while test pilots refined handling for hard carrier cycles and long over-water sorties. The Bureau of Aeronautics moved first with orders in January 1943, accepting risk to gain time. Grumman folded fixes into the line instead of pausing for a new block. Tail vibration, carburetor pressurization, and cowl airflow were corrected between serials. The approach reflected a simple cause and effect. Incremental change today was worth more than perfect change next year. Flight testing centered on deck manners and gunnery stability. Pilots reported firm tracking in dives and predictable stalls on approach, two traits that cut accidents during mass recoveries. The aircraft felt deliberate in the climb at low altitude, but above the merge it held energy and rolled cleanly. Engineers logged each comment, and shop leads adjusted baffles, trim tabs, and linkages. Early operational workups placed VF-9 on USS Essex and VF-5 on USS Yorktown. Training over Hawaiian waters emphasized power management and vertical tactics. Instructors drilled sections to avoid flat turns, attack from above, and reform quickly. The goal was not theater. It was survival and task success for bombers and torpedo squadrons riding behind the screen. The first combat probes came in August 1943 at Marcus Island. Hellcats escorted strikes through scattered cloud, met light resistance, and recovered without loss. Reports praised visibility in the groove and the wide track gear that forgave hard traps. The data did not prove dominance, but it justified confidence to push toward more heavily defended targets. Wake Island in October provided a sterner trial. Intercepts formed at altitude, and the new fighter met them with short bursts and downhill exits. Gun camera film showed concentrated patterns from 6 Brownings at planned convergence. Maintenance debriefs noted few systemic faults. Crews replaced tires, tightened cowl latches, and turned aircraft for the next cycle. Rabaul in November 1943 became the first sustained measure. Dense flak and veteran defenders challenged every approach. Hellcats from USS Essex and USS Bunker Hill climbed to guard the ingress, then rolled through intercepts to clear the egress lanes. Lieutenant Richard Zeke Cormier recorded an early victory and returned in a damaged airframe that still trapped without incident. Commanders drew a plain conclusion from those sorties. A fighter that brought its pilot home preserved experience, and experience multiplied results on the next launch. The Hellcat's armor and self-sealing tanks turned many lethal hits into repairable dents. In ready rooms, that reliability shifted the tone from caution to method. Crews planned to win, not merely to survive. Production tempo matched the shift at sea. Bethpage expanded lines, subcontractors fed assemblies, and acceptance teams kept defects low enough to avoid bottlenecks. The nickname the Ironworks reflected output as much as structure. High delivery rates allowed squadrons to rotate airframes before failures and to keep divisions at full strength for long cruises. Doctrine evolved with the airframe. Replacement air groups, standardized altitude gates, section rolls, and radio brevity. Captured zero evaluations at NAS. Anacostia confirmed that vertical separation and hit-and-run passes denied the enemy its turning advantage. Syllabi codified those findings so that new pilots arrived already fluent in the platform's strengths and limits. By late 1943, intelligence noted changes in enemy behavior. Formations that once pressed confidently now broke earlier and dove for cloud. Intercepts grew less cohesive, especially when sweeps preceded strikes by an hour. The effect was cumulative. Each disrupted launch cycle left more aircraft on the ground during the decisive minutes of a raid. Carrier organization amplified the trend. Task groups stacked combat air patrols in rings, with forward sweeps to thin defenders and escorts to ride with bombers. Controllers used radar to vector divisions into the merge with altitude in hand. The Hellcat's steady dive and high-speed control fit that geometry, turning guidance into kills and safe egress. Operational feedback continued to refine hardware. Guns received attention to feed reliability after long bursts. Engine baffles were trimmed to reduce temperature spikes in climbs. Minor canopy changes improved defogging on humid approaches. None of these adjustments altered the design. Together, they increased the margin for pilots working at the limits of fuel and daylight. The campaign against Truk in February 1944 validated the system at scale. Fighter sweeps at dawn secured the vertical block above the lagoon, and intercepts collapsed before they could mass. Throughout the day, Hellcats orbited high cover, while strike groups cut shipping and fuel. The cause and effect was linear: clear the air, hold the cap, and keep bombers unmolested. Personnel policy reinforced the combat loop. Aces such as Edward O'Hare and rising leaders like Alex Vraciu fed tactics back into stateside schools. Rotation schedules moved veterans into training seats long enough to seed new cohorts, then return them to sea with updated procedures. The airplane enabled this cycle by forgiving errors that would have killed instructors. By the opening of 1944's Central Pacific push, the platform's reputation was settled on fact. Pilots trusted its recovery characteristics and dive strength. Deck crews trusted its gear and brakes. Staff trusted its availability rates across heavy tempos. The aircraft still lost turning contests at low altitude, but crews had learned not to offer those terms. The strategic consequence emerged in planning boards. With a fighter that could escort deep, clear airfields and trap safely, carriers could range closer to defended coasts and sustain operations day after day. The decision to invade the Marianas relied on that confidence. Air superiority was no longer an aspiration. It was a schedulable task. Japanese commanders recognized the shift and tried to regain initiative with massed formations. Training pipelines, fuel stocks, and maintenance capacity could not restore the edge lost in 1943. The Hellcat did not end that advantage in a single battle. It eroded it sortie by sortie until the decisive test arrived over the Philippine Sea. Act 1 closes on a practical verdict. The Hellcat was not a miracle design. It was a coherent answer to carrier war. It combined power that carried weight, protection that carried pilots home, and simplicity that carried squadrons through long campaigns. Those choices, validated in early operations from Marcus to Rabaul, set the conditions for the turning battles to come. In late 1943, fast carrier groups pushed into the Central Pacific with air wings rebuilt around the Hellcat. Combat air patrols formed layered rings, while sweep and escort sections ranged ahead of the strikes. The task was explicit: meet enemy formations first, break their cohesion, and hold open the route for bombers to reach the target and return. Rabaul offered the first hard measure in November 1943. The harbor sheltered cruisers, transports, and veteran fighter units. Hellcats from USS Essex and USS Bunker Hill climbed to altitude and intercepted Zero groups forming above the bay. Short bursts at high speed scattered the defenders, and the escorts rode shotgun through flake on the egress. The pattern that crews refined there became routine. A lead section took the bounce from above, wingmen guarded the exit, and divisions reformed before the fight slowed into a turn. When energy bled away, leaders called a climb to reset altitude. The purpose was not display. The purpose was control of the air at the time and place the strike required. Night experiments followed in the Gilberts. Radar pickets cued radar-equipped Avengers that guided two seatless Hellcats by moonlight. The tactic worked, but carried risk. On one of those sorties in November 1943, Commander Edward O'Hare failed to return. His loss recorded the price of learning to deny the enemy the darkness around new anchorages. By early 1944, the debate about the aircraft ended. Task Force 58 concentrated Essex-class and light carriers, each with decks crowded by the new fighter. Raids gave way to a schedule of campaigns, beginning with the stronghold at Truk. The aim was to erase forward logistics and scatter defenders before the push to the Marianas. Operation Hailstone opened on the 17th of February 1944. Before dawn, Hellcats swept the fields and seaplane ramps, then climbed to hold the vertical block over the lagoon. Through the day, they orbited high cover, while dive bombers and torpedo planes cut shipping. Intercepts formed late and broke apart under repeated passes from above. Debriefs after Truk reduced success to 3 traits. The engine held power in long climbs and tight turns when flown fast. The airframe stayed controllable after damage that would cripple lighter designs. The cockpit view and wide track gear trimmed deck mishaps during heavy recoveries. Each trait preserved pilots, and pilots preserved momentum. Logistics sustained the tempo. Escort carriers ferried replacements into forward anchorages. Depot ships stocked engines, tires, and wing panels. Crews rotated guns, checked cowls, and turned aircraft on a predictable rhythm. The Japanese side, strained for spares and mechanics, could not match the cadence. Each week that difference widened. Across March and April, the drive crossed the Marshalls and Carolines. Hellcats escorted strikes against Palau and Wolai, then swept to keep fighters on the ground. Success registered as uneventful recovery cycles. Bombers returned, decks stayed unhit, and convoys moved under a canopy that looked routine only because it was enforced every hour. The summer objective was the Marianas. Seizing Saipan, Tinian, and Guam would place heavy bombers within range of the home islands. The Imperial Navy gathered carriers and fresh air groups to contest the landings. Many new aviators had few deck hours. Numbers remained high, but experience and coordination were already thin. On the 13th of June, 1944, daily sweeps began over the islands. Hellcats shredded patrol lines and cratered runways to delay scrambles. Escort sections met the strikes on return and guided them through scattered intercepts. By week's end, reports noted fraying formations and piecemeal attacks. The air picture showed a defense under pressure. The decisive test arrived on the 19th of June in the Philippine Sea. Radar screens brightened, controllers stacked patrols in arcs, and divisions launched on vectors. The first Japanese wave approached at altitude. Hellcats rolled inverted above the formation and cut through it in diving passes. Bombers dumped ordnance early. Escorts broke formation to survive. Alex Vraciu intercepted a group of dive bombers and downed 6 in minutes. Elsewhere, divisions split scattered attackers and chased them downhill away from the fleet. Some reached the ships but failed to score. Later waves faced thicker patrols and less cohesion. By evening, pilots described oil streaks and debris fields that marked the path home. Carrier doctrine meshed with the platform. Fighters maintained energy, avoided flat turns, and reformed to attack again. Controllers kept them clear of friendly flak lanes and deconflicted altitudes. After the fight, the aircraft's forgiving stall and wide gear mattered, as dozens trapped on heaving decks in failing light without compounding losses. On the 20th of June, with enemy cover broken, the fleet launched a far-ranging counterstrike near sunset. Fuel margins were tight and radio control was strict. Hellcats escorted the attack across extreme distance to find withdrawing carriers. The blow ended the carrier air arm as a coordinated force and left the Marianas landings under firm protection. Audits later adjusted claims, yet the strategic verdict did not move. Japanese carrier aviation lost trained crews and the ability to mass and guide strikes. Task forces continued operations with confidence in patrol coverage and escort strength. The battle's nickname came from pilots' blunt debriefs, but the cause was preparation layered over a reliable airframe. Behind the tallies lay repeated habits. Pilots pre-briefed merges and exit headings. Armorers set gun convergence and checked feed chutes. Crew chiefs signed off cowl latches and cooling baffles after climbs at military power. The Hellcat rewarded those steps by behaving the same way each launch cycle. Consistency, multiplied at scale, became a weapon. With the Marianas secured, the offensive pivoted toward the Philippines. In September and October 1944, fast carriers hit airfields across Luzon and the Visayas. Hellcats slashed scramble attempts, burned fuel dumps, and drove interceptors off the lanes used by strike groups. Each day's radar plots showed fewer organized climbs and shorter pursuits. Leyte Gulf tested the system under pressure. Raids formed over Luzon and converged on the landing area. Controllers fanned divisions to meet them far from the transports. David McCampbell led a small force that cut into a larger strike and scored repeatedly, returning with tanks nearly dry and belts empty. His sortie illustrated a mature method at work. Losses still came from weather and fatigue. Tropical squalls knocked aircraft into the sea. Deck crashes sheared gear and fouled arresting cables. Flak snatched fighters during strafing passes. The Hellcat reduced the risk but could not erase it. Air superiority was measured by fewer enemy attacks getting through, not by the absence of names on casualty lists. A parallel contest grew at night. The F6F5N variant carried a small radar set and flame dampers for single-seat interceptions. Training emphasized throttle discipline and scope reading to prevent overshoots. Success spread across forward anchorages, and night intruders found fewer gaps. The program could not bring back early losses, but it closed the door behind them. Operations over Formosa in October 1944 further eroded defenses. Hellcats met steady intercepts along the west coast, beginning at altitude and ending in fast dives toward open water. By week's end, bomber crews reported thinner opposition on ingress and egress. The effect was visible in shipping lanes that now stayed open to the next staging areas. As the campaign reached 1945, doctrine hardened. Hellcats flew in layered formations with fixed altitude gates and radio brevity that survived stress. Replacement pilots arrived with common tactics and gunnery standards. The enemy, short of fuel and spares, could not impose the tight turning contests that had once defined the theater. Iwo Jima's approach in February 1945 brought carriers close to dense flak belts. Hellcats split time between high cover and fast responses to radar plots over the beaches. Escorts held altitude while strikes worked inland, then swept the routes home. The result was not immunity, but a steady decline in successful intercepts against bombers and transports. Okinawa demanded the heaviest, most prolonged effort. From March to June 1945, special attack units hunted the fleet across wide arcs. Radar picket destroyers stood far out to give warning and suffered for it. Hellcats launched in layers, some to meet high contacts, others to scrape low entries hiding in sea clutter and cloud. Procedures tightened by the day. Controllers pushed patrol orbits outward and stacked altitudes closer to seal gaps. Fighters intercepted in pairs, fired short bursts, and climbed back through assigned gates to reset. When attackers slipped through, additional sections met them over the picket line. It was a race among detection, vectoring, and endurance at military power. The airframe's stability under hard maneuver paid out here. Pilots aimed short bursts that conserved ammunition through long alerts. Wide gear eased high-stress recoveries on busy rolling decks. Maintenance crews turned aircraft in minutes, changing belts, swapping tires, and checking cowls, while the next division strapped in beside fueled machines. Despite layers of defense, some attackers reached the carriers. Bunker Hill and other ships took grievous hits. Repair parties and medical teams worked within sight of loaded aircraft and hot engines. The scenes underscored a hard limit. Air superiority shrank risk, but never removed it. The fighter stood as a shield, not a promise. Industrial depth kept that shield intact. Grumman delivered new airframes in steady numbers, and depot ships carried engines and wing panels close to the line. Damaged aircraft were swapped rather than nursed. Pilots rotated home to seed training units, then returned with updated methods. Lessons traveled faster than attrition could erase them. Across the theater, the kill ratio settled near 19-1, 19-1, in favor of the Hellcat for air-to-air engagements. Context mattered. Opponents in 1944 and 1945 often had few hours, and fuel shortages limited practice. Yet the ratio also recorded choices. A durable airframe, heavy armament, radar control, disciplined tactics, and production that kept squadrons full. Gunnery technique matured as targets shifted from fighters to intruders and ground assets. The Hellcat's steady platform allowed brief aimed bursts at converging angles. Crews learned to break off rather than chase a turn into flak or terrain. Fewer preventable losses meant more experienced pilots available for the next day's schedule. The campaign widened to shipping lanes and coastal sites. Rockets and bombs hung under wings for runs at radar sets, parked aircraft, and gun positions. Briefed routes avoided known flak belts and kept egress lines over water. The fighter's rugged frame and predictable handling made it a practical strike tool when specialty dive bombers were scarce. By mid-1945, the Imperial Navy's carrier air arm no longer functioned as a system. Aircraft rose in local groups with uneven training and fragile logistics. Some searched for convoys, others probed pickets. The Hellcat met them in a script refined since 1943: detect, climb, intercept, and reform. The sea lanes to Okinawa remained open. Inside ready rooms, tone shifted from anxiety to method. New arrivals absorbed rules that preserved life: never turn flat with a zero, keep altitude margins, fire in short bursts, and exit downhill. The airplane did not mint aces. It made disciplined pilots more survivable. Survival stacked experience, and experience and stacked results. The map recorded the outcome of Act 2. The Central Pacific Axis advanced through the Marianas and the Philippines with carriers rarely challenged at scale. Airfields once considered safe became targets of routine morning sweeps. The Hellcat's design, power, protection, and simplicity translated into the metric that mattered most: returning pilots and unbroken decks. What began as tentative raids became rolling pressure. Each new anchorage pushed the fighter's radius forward. Each successful interception protected a transport or a deck crew at the wire. The aircraft was not the only tool, but it was the constant one, present at dawn launches, noon recoveries, and dusk scrambles across a widening ocean. Act 2 closes on a plain balance. The fighter the enemy mocked forced a retreat measured in thousands of miles and uncounted sorties. It did so by repetition rather than spectacle: climb, intercept, burst, reform, and recover. The statistics would be argued later. The fact on every chart table was simpler: control of the Pacific sky had changed hands. By autumn 1944, the fast carrier force worked as a single instrument. Fighters swept first, bombers followed, and reserve sections orbited to close gaps. The Hellcat sat at the center of this routine. It climbed under load, absorbed damage, and trapped reliably on crowded decks, turning planning assumptions into daily results across widening seas. September strikes over Luzon and Formosa set conditions for the return to the Philippines. Hellcats slashed scramble attempts, burned fuel dumps, and strafed dispersal areas to deny replacements. Each week, radar plots showed fewer organized climbs and shorter pursuits. The approach lanes to Leyte opened as opposition thinned and coordination faltered on the other side. Leyte Gulf tested the system at scale. Raids formed over Luzon and converged on the landing area in layered waves. Controllers fanned divisions outward to meet contacts far from the transports. David McCampbell led a small element that cut a larger strike apart, scored repeatedly, and returned with tanks nearly dry. His sortie illustrated doctrine refined under pressure. By late 1944, the character of Japan's air arm had changed. Veteran pilots lost in the Solomons and the Marianas could not be replaced quickly. Training time shortened, fuel was scarce, and maintenance standards eroded. Courage remained, yet formations frayed under the first bounce. The Hellcat exploited that gap with altitude control and disciplined gunnery. Carrier groups pivoted north in early 1945 to neutralize Kyushu bases. Hellcats swept ahead of bombers at dawn, then climbed to guard the task force through the day. Engagements were brief and decisive. Each afternoon tally listed more enemy losses and fewer clean escapes. The fleet closed the coastline with growing confidence in its fighter screen. Night brought a different contest. F6, F5, and variants carried small radar sets and flame dampers for single-seat interceptions. Training emphasized throttle control and scope reading to prevent overshoots. Over forward anchorages, the method matured into routine. Intruders that once harassed refueling areas now faced a patient interceptor able to find and finish in darkness. The approach to Iwo Jima pulled carriers close to dense belts of flak. Hellcats split time between high cover over the beaches and rapid responses to radar plots. Escorts held altitude while strike groups worked inland, then cleared the routes home. Losses did not vanish, but successful intercepts against bombers and transports declined across the fortnight. Attrition remained constant. Sudden squalls folded wings and pitched aircraft off the bow. Deck crashes tore arresting cables and pinned crews. Low strafing runs found hidden guns along ridgelines and harbors. The Hellcat's armor and structure saved pilots who might have died in lighter airframes, yet the ledger still recorded names after each operation. Okinawa demanded the hardest, longest defense. From March to June 1945, special attack units hunted the fleet across wide arcs. Radar picket destroyers stood far from the carriers to give warning and paid heavily for the duty. Hellcats launched in layers, some to meet high contacts, others to scrape low entries hiding in sea clutter and cloud breaks. Procedures tightened day by day. Controllers pushed patrol orbits outward, stacked altitudes closer, and assigned fixed rejoin gates. Pairs intercepted, fired short bursts, and climbed back to reset position before fuel margins narrowed. When attackers slipped through, additional sections met them over the picket line. It became a race among detection, vectoring, and endurance. The airframe's steady behavior under stress paid out here. Pilots could fire brief, aimed bursts that conserved ammunition during long alerts. The wide track gear eased recoveries on rolling decks crowded with fueled aircraft. Maintenance teams turned machines in minutes, swapping belts, tires, and cowl panels while the next division strapped in at the catapult. Despite layers of defense, some attackers reached the carriers. Bunker Hill and other ships suffered grievous hits. Repair parties and medical teams worked beside armed aircraft and hot engines under drifting smoke. The scenes confirmed a hard boundary. Air superiority cut the odds, but never removed risk. The fighter stood as a shield, not a guarantee. Logistics kept the shield from thinning. Depot ships brought engines, propellers, and wing panels within reach of the line. Escort carriers ferried replacements that could be assembled and flown within hours. Pilots rotated home to train new cohorts, then returned with updated practices. Lessons traveled faster than attrition could erase them. Statistics traced the shape of collapse. Across the war, Hellcats accounted for roughly 5,156 aerial victories for about 270 air-to-air losses, a ratio near 19-1. Context mattered. Fuel, training, and maintenance had dwindled for the enemy. Yet the ratio also recorded choices in design, control, and production. Ground attack grew in weight as the fleet closed the distance to defended coasts. Hellcats carried rockets and bombs against radar sites, coastal guns, and parked aircraft. Crews briefed routes to avoid known flak belts and rehearsed egress over open water. The steady gunnery platform and rugged frame made the fighter a practical strike tool when specialty bombers were scarce. Operations over Formosa in October 1944 had previewed this pattern. Intercepts began at altitude and ended in fast dives toward the sea, while repeated sweeps left fewer defenders each day. By 1945, that logic applied across Kyushu and the Ryukyus. Shipping lanes stayed open, and amphibious moves received top cover measured in schedules, not hopes. Inside ready rooms, the tone shifted from anxiety to method. New arrivals absorbed rules that preserved life. Never accept a flat turn with a zero, keep altitude margins, fire in short bursts, and exit downhill. The airplane did not mint aces by itself. It made disciplined pilots more survivable. Survival stacked experience, and experience stacked output. Commanders translated that stability into plans. Fighters guarded the fleet, escorted strikes, and suppressed fields ahead of landings. When heavy bombers passed within range, they found fewer intercepts and slower reactions. Air war shifted from duel to management of space and time. The Hellcat enforced that management every hour a deck turned into the wind. As spring advanced, the Imperial Navy's carrier air arm no longer functioned as a system. Aircraft rose in local groups with uneven training and fragile logistics. Some searched for convoys, others probed the pickets. The Hellcat met them in a script refined since 1943: detect, climb, intercept, reform, and recover. The sea lanes to Okinawa remained open. Weather remained the last indifferent opponent. Squalls erased horizons and slammed aircraft into the deck. Fog crept across anchorages at dawn and hid the groove. Crews trusted the Hellcat's stall behavior and sturdy gear to survive tight patterns and heavy seas. Each predictable trap saved lives beyond the count of victories. Human cost threaded every day's schedule. Catapult crews stood beside spinning propellers on wet planks. Radar operators stared into scopes through long watches. Armorers hauled belts and checked feed chutes under heat and noise. Many names never left the manifest of support teams, yet each safe landing owed them a portion of its margin. On the Japanese side, the drain was irrecoverable. Instructors fell at the front, and graduates reached combat with too few hours. Fuel shortages cut practice and forced rushed conversions to new tasks. Aircraft arrived with defects that better maintenance could have prevented. The Hellcat did not defeat a single design. It outlasted an entire system under pressure. By mid-1945, plans formed for a possible invasion of the home islands. The Navy refined a pattern that joined engineering, tactics, and production into one cycle. Fighters would guard the fleet, escort strikes, and cap the beaches. The assumption beneath those plans was simple. Air superiority could be scheduled and sustained as long as decks kept turning. In August 1945, combat stopped before that invasion began. Carriers recovered the last sorties and turned for home. On their decks sat rows of aircraft once judged blunt and heavy. Their record told a different story. The design had returned pilots who became instructors, squadron leads, and experienced wingmen, and that accumulation ended the airfight. Measured by cause and effect, collapse followed clear lines. Radar extended the fleet's reach. Disciplined pairs controlled merges and exits. A rugged airframe preserved trained crews. Industrial depth replaced losses before squadrons thinned. Each link supported the next until enemy strikes could no longer mass, guide, or endure against a ready defense. The Hellcat's closing balance rested on routine more than spectacle. It delivered altitude when needed, steadiness when firing, and predictability in the groove. It lowered variance in a dangerous trade, letting commanders plan rather than hope. That set of traits, verified across Leyte, Iwo, and Okinawa, turned a contested sky into managed airspace. Act 3 ends on the intersection of collapse and sacrifice. Japan's air power broke under sustained pressure, and the fleet held the air above every major operation in the war's final year. Each returning pilot marked a success larger than a tally on a fuselage. The Hellcat gave the Navy time, reach, and resilience, and those three together closed the Pacific sky. When the Pacific fell quiet in 1945, the Hellcat's impact was already measurable. It had guarded every major amphibious move from the Marshalls to Okinawa and kept strike groups intact over long water. Carrier commanders planned launches with the expectation that fighters would meet raids far from the decks and that most aviators would return to the wire. The figures told a consistent story. Hellcat crews recorded 5,156 aerial victories for about 270 air-to-air losses, a ratio near 19-1. Production reached 12,275 airframes by war's end. Quantity alone did not win the air. It enabled training, rotation, and steady presence over targets. Doctrine matured with the machine. Radar control stacked combat air patrols in layers. Two-ship tactics emphasized altitude, short bursts, and downhill exits. Night fighter variants extended coverage into darkness and reduced intruder harassment of anchorages. The result was not immunity, but lower variance in outcomes. Commanders could schedule risk and keep pressure constant. Design choices explain the reliability. The R-2800 delivered power for climbs under load and stable high-speed dives. Armor and self-sealing tanks returned damaged aircraft to the deck, preserving experienced aviators. Wide-track gear and predictable stalls cut accident rates during heavy recoveries. Each feature traded elegance for survival and paid back in retained skill. Industrial organization amplified those traits. Depot ships carried engines, propellers, and wing panels forward. Escort carriers ferried replacements that could be assembled and flown within hours. Stateside schools standardized gunnery, altitude gates, and deck procedures. Veterans rotated through those classrooms, turning combat notes into habits for the next cohort at sea. Strategic results followed in sequence. With air superiority sustained, the island-hopping path closed on the Marianas and the Philippines. Convoys approached beaches with continuous top cover, and land-based bombers gained reliable corridors to the home islands. The enemy's options narrowed from initiative to reaction, then from reaction to preservation of remaining forces. For Japan, the same months confirmed a systemic failure. Early technical advantage could not offset the loss of veteran instructors, shrinking fuel stocks, and fragile maintenance. New pilots arrived with fewer hours and faced an opponent that fought on known terms. The Hellcat was the visible instrument of that imbalance, but the cause ran deeper. Jet aircraft entered service as demobilization began. The Hellcat's frontline career ended quickly, yet its influence persisted in checklists and syllabi. Carrier aviation kept the lessons that mattered. A fighter must be a steady gunnery platform, trap predictably in hard weather, and protect crews as the primary resource. Survivability outranked spectacle at sea. The human balance remained central to the record, a rugged airframe that could land damaged preserved months of training with each safe recovery. Deck crews trusted its behavior in the groove, and that trust reduced hesitation in marginal conditions. Many lives were saved by predictable handling rather than by dramatic performance at the merge. In the larger history of the Pacific, the Hellcat linked industry, organization, and combat method. It turned radar plots into timely intercepts, tactics into repeatable results, and production lines into sustained presence. The type carried no mystique beyond function, yet that function, delivered day after day, closed a long maritime campaign on schedulable terms. Its message was durable and plain. Air superiority is produced by compatible choices repeated at scale: power that carries weight, protection that carries pilots home, training that carries lessons forward, and logistics that carry all three to the line. The Hellcat embodied those choices, and the Pacific War ended within the conditions they created. In late 1945, carrier decks grew quiet as patrols ended and tools were stowed. The F6F Hellcat had done what the Navy required: meet raids far from the fleet, escort strikes across long water, and return crews to the wire. Its record counted thousands of victories, yet its greater result was routine control of altitude and time. A fighter first judged blunt had proven repeatable under pressure. Operations could be scheduled, risks could be managed, and the Pacific Air War closed on those terms. The series now shifts from high cover to the shoreline. Next comes the Vought F4U Corsair, the bent-wing fighter that carried bombs, rockets, and low passes against airfields, barges, and coastal guns from the Solomons to Okinawa. It was the parallel fight at treetop and wavetop, where speed met flak at short range. If the Hellcat defined control, the Corsair defined pressure. The next episode follows the crews who learned to master its power at sea. The F6F Hellcat entered fleet service in 1943. It used the Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial, carried 6.50 caliber Brownings, and later mounted rockets or bombs for strikes. Principal variants were the F6F3 and the refined F6F5. The F6F5N added a small radar for night interceptions. Production reached 12,275 airframes by 1945, built chiefly at Grumman's Bethpage plant for carrier operations. Early combat in 1943 included raids on Marcus and Wake and sustained action over Rabaul. Reports emphasized stable gunnery and dives, reliable deck manners, and survivability after damage. In February 1944, Operation Hailstone hit Truk. Dawn fighter sweeps cleared interceptors. Hellcats then orbited high cover while strike groups burned shipping and fuel. The outcome reduced a major forward base and opened the path to the Central Pacific Drive. The Marianas campaign in June 1944 led directly to the Philippine Sea Battle on 19–20 of June. Radar control stacked combat air patrols and divisions intercepted successive waves before they reached the carriers. Audited claims varied by source, yet the strategic effect was fixed. Japanese carrier aviation lost trained crews and cohesion. American landings on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam proceeded under firm air cover maintained from fast carriers. Through autumn 1944, Hellcats escorted and swept over Formosa and guarded the Leyte landings. In October, David McCampbell of VF-15 scored multiple victories in a single sortie and finished the war with 34. Alex Vraciu closed with 19. Their records illustrated the platform's method: altitude control, short bursts from 6 guns, and disciplined reform to avoid low-speed turning contests. In early 1945, Hellcats covered Iwo Jima approaches and flew long alerts during the Okinawa campaign from March to June. Night Fighter F6F5. N units cut intruder activity over anchorages. Across the war, Hellcats accounted for approximately 5,156 aerial victories for about 270 air-to-air losses, a ratio near 19-1, while serving as the U.S. Navy's principal fighter until jets entered post-war service.